You know what you were saying about his character before, where he gave more than 100% in everything he did. You know, that is something important to remember, that that personality before shapes how you're going to deal with what comes afterwards, right? And so giving that consistent effort, you know, not giving up or wanting to continue to persist and showing that you can communicate or that you will make an effort to try to remember your name. That's incredible what you just said. Very, very touching that he was doing that to remember what he needed to say. So did he do pretty well then for a while? Tell me about kind of when things maybe started to evolve a little in your mind.
Yeah, he did. There were ups and downs, to be sure, but he was getting very good care, and like he enjoyed, no matter how he was playing, you know, he had some nice golf buddies that really were good
forgiving.
Yeah, they were very forgiving and would they were very supportive, and he would play. So he really did. We, to the ability that we could, we were able to do some trips and travel. And when I started, it was actually, our last trip, we went to Mexico, that it was really there, that it was, that I started to really see the real decline in his inability to.
And when was that?
That was we went in the end of February 2020. And just seeing how, he was so, it was not prideful in a bad way, but just prideful. He was so determined that he would cover up a lot of things that I didn't even realize till, we were there, how much he was struggling, how much it was pain. It was hard for him to walk and do a lot of things. And so
what were some of those things that you saw that he was covering up that might be helpful for other people too?
Yeah, I would say, like, it was very painful for him to walk. He would be in pain, but he wouldn't share it with me. Even when we go to the doctor, I would say, well, like, you're supposed to go, like, he thought it was a test, like you were supposed to say, I'm passing it, I'm going to be a straight A student. No, you're supposed to tell the doctor what's wrong with you. But no, when he would go to the doctor, he would be, oh, he's doing great. Look at my muscles.
He didn't want to fail that test.
He didn't want to fail.
Wow.
And he would be like, it's okay that they can do something to help you. But he was so determined. So it was there. It was also the speech, his ability. I could just see him, like, really, like, slowing down. And I also started to see one of the effects of the tumor is you can have weakness in the body. So I started to see the weakness in his leg. So his right leg started to become weaker. In his hand, where I didn't even know at one point, that he wasn't able to really feed himself properly. So, I just started to try to help step in and help, prepare his meals and things. But he just never would complain. He wouldn't complain.
I was going to ask, did he accept the assistance from you all? He did.
He did eventually. There were some things that he was, and actually the more he started to accept assistance, that's when I realized that how much he was, how he was doing. So we had a bedroom upstairs, and he refused to go downstairs. And finally, I said, "We're going to move down." And when I realized that he was, that he was acquiescing to it, that wow, there's more going on there, than.
It's a lot about the unspoken, right? And then just articulating that. And people who, I know what you mean by prideful. It's not a negative prideful. It's just something where people he didn't want to fail the test, didn't want to be a burden, wanted to be independent. And then when someone else finally articulates it, who's close to you, who knows you and loves you, then you're able to say, well, yeah, actually, maybe that is going on. Right. Maybe I am actually unable to do this or that. What were your impressions of that period of time, too? Were you aware that things were starting to become worse?
So I came home in, I think, July 1st or June 30th, 2020. Mm-hmm. And so I think at that point, several months. Actually, I was also home in March of 2020 for a little bit and then cut my trip short because of COVID. But so I could see maybe a little bit, probably more so on the speech front in March. But then when I came back sort of for good in the summer of 2020, then I could definitely see where he was a little bit slower in terms of moving around and maybe not as balanced because, like my mom was saying, his right side was losing strength. And he would definitely still try to be out in the yard, like we were mentioning earlier with the power tools. So my mom hid the power tools after he I think it was my first week of school, law school, he fell outside because he had been outside for so long working with the tools, and so ended up needing to go to the hospital for several days. And that was really tough because that was still in the height of COVID, so nobody could be in there with him. Mm-hmm. So he was just by himself, and looked I came out of class, virtual class, from the basement, and the paramedics were there to take him out in the stretcher. So that was a surprise. I couldn't imagine what it would be like for him because he seemed very disoriented. And so to then be in the hospital and not have anyone around you, that's pretty challenging. So after that, he took it easier for a little bit. The power tools went away, but he still had scissors. And so he would trim the bushes with scissors outside and probably spent a little too much time outside than was probably healthy for him. But he liked to push it. And, I think the nature of his disease was very challenging because there isn't really, if you're having trouble reading, the only thing really to do during the day is watch TV, and I know that had to be difficult to just watch TV day in and day out and not get that outside time and other activity time that he used to have.
Yeah, especially if you're a doer. I was processing what you were saying and thinking about, I always try to imagine what would that be like for every person, and you realize that just wanting to even go outside and trim the hedges, distract himself in a way that was meaningful for him. So you're not fixated on nothing and that nothingness day in and day out. It's like waiting for dying, and that can be very, very demoralizing. It's a very hard part, in hospice, it's a very hard part. We see the finality of it, but it's a hard part with a lot of diseases that if people are doers or mentally have some awareness still of that they're struggling with not being able to do what they want to do, which normally would give them distraction and fulfillment. And then what do they do with that time? Sean, did you have at that point, or were you still away at that point? I think, did you see him or your interactions with him if you had come home?
So COVID made that difficult. I remember prior to COVID, my sense was that he was kind of managing the effects of his treatment, and had kind of been maintaining at that level for a while. That was my sense of it, at least. And then after my mom returned from their trip, she mentioned, I believe she called and gave her concerns about his health and wasn't sure. I think this was in early 2020. How much more time we had with him. Then COVID happened, and most of there wasn't the ability to kind of go home and see him. But I think my awareness of his decline started when, I started to hear about the falls. And that I think was the clearest indication that he was at a different point, a different phase in his, in the progression of his disease and in his health.
Okay. What, the natural, then you see someone declining, there's going to be a progression to a point where you start to say, wow, what do we do? How did hospice come up? Was that something that was broached by the physicians or you all coming together and saying, hey, we're here?
Well, when he fell and was hospitalized, we talked to the doctor, and the doctor said at that point that there was really, and he was also having trouble tolerating the temozolomide, which was the oral chemotherapy drug that he was on, and he didn't like taking it, and it made him, ill. And so, in talking with the doctor about that, he said, "Well, my recommendation is that you that there isn't any other treatment that's working, and that what you really might want to focus on is look at hospice." So he first brought it up, and the reaction was, I always remember, he said, he wanted to be at home. And the doctor did explain, that there was home hospice. So we just sort of left it there. And that was maybe in September, the September-October timeframe. And at that point, even though we just left it, we did have a visit from someone who was a physical therapist, and the guy was, I always remember the story because the guy was trying to say, oh, well, I can come and help you, with, walking, and Larry said, well, he says, I could pick you up and throw you, I don't need your help. So that was kind of like that was kind of like the end of that discussion. But then as he started to fall, and those became more frequent, and he had greater weakness in his leg and his arm, it became apparent. Like we, I remember talking to Sheena, and we said, because he fell, and it would take two of us to help him up, and it was really very scary. Mm-hmm. And we became concerned that, that we weren't prepared to help him and didn't really know, what the next step were or what this could look like, because it appeared to be happening pretty quickly. There was within it seems like a 2-week time frame that the decline just was really severe. So I went to, at this point, I went to the internet and started, honestly.
That's how everything starts.
Yeah, exactly. So I started researching and doing a little reading, and that's actually, ended up placing a call and spoke with someone at the Home Hospice of Georgia, and she was just really a lovely lady, and she sent someone out to come and talk, and I, decided that, we were going to, start. It was very, very scary to think about it.
Was that kind of did you feel like you were making almost a unilateral executive decision at that point? He wasn't really completely, he had heard hospice mentioned. Mm-hmm.
Well, she came, yes. And so I told him about it. I said she was coming, and she explained, and I was really surprised because I did expect him to say that he wasn't interested. Mm-hmm. But she asked him, and she looked at him, and she said, is this something you want to do? And he said yes. And at that point, I think she could see the sort of, she said, well, I could come, maybe, once every other week. He said, no, you can come once a week. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he was
I think
open.
it's that thing we were saying again, where articulating it yourself, saying it out loud yourself is really formidable. But if someone says it to you, you can kind of give in and agree a little bit and say, well, actually, I wouldn't mind having more help.
Right.
You know, it's very hard. It's very hard to ask for help. It's very hard, especially with someone. He sounds like he was so independent. Yes. Which is really actually a very good quality. It's a beautiful quality. But then the correlation there is, you know, you don't really want anyone's help and you want to do on your own. So you started hospice. He actually sounded like he was okay with it and encouraging it more. And how did it go initially? How was the hospice experience initially for you all?
Well, I can start off to say it was very helpful because it was a relief to know that there was somebody who had been through this before and there were some resources because I felt like after he didn't want to go, his doctor had said that he would continue seeing him and having MRIs. But he decided that if he wasn't going to be treated, he didn't want to have any of it. He didn't want to. He didn't see the point of having MRIs.
He understood the bigger picture.
Yeah, and that was a little difficult because there was no reference point for us. At least with the MRI, I would know what was happening with the tumor. I had nothing of that. I could only see what was happening to him physically. So we weren't in contact with the doctor anymore. So having someone who had been through this before and could help God was really what it was really very, very welcoming and comforting to be able to get some answers and have some support.
Sheena and Sean, you were there pretty much. I know you were there from the summer on, but you both were there then at that point, correct? What were your impressions about hospice at that point for your dad?
Yeah, I was. I think we didn't initially understand what hospice was, especially home hospice, and so because around Christmas was when his movement really started to decline, and so that was sort of the impetus for her to look and find you all. And so when the nurses, I forget who came at first. We had a different nurse initially, and then ended up sticking. Ashley ended up being our permanent nurse and coming weekly. It really provided, I think, a level of like comfort to know, especially during COVID. You know, he wasn't even. Most of the appointments were tele-appointments before, unless he had to go in for an MRI or something like that. And then, with COVID, it would have only been him and maybe my mom who would have been allowed into the appointment room. So having someone come to the house and like the whole family is able to be a part of the care and hear what's going on and talk with the care provider, I thought was really helpful. And then Stanley began coming as well, and that was really wonderful. And definitely, Sean was mentioning. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say Stanley being the chaplain.
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
Yes, so I think Stanley came. I missed his first few visits because I happened to be in class. But he came and chatted with my dad and my mom and asked, learned about his faith and asked if he enjoyed music. And my dad said yes, he used to sing in the choir when we were younger. And, unfortunately now with the illness, he couldn't sing anymore, but he always appreciated music. And so Stanley said he was going to play the next time he came. And so I remember I was in the basement during class and I hear this beautiful music like coming down the stairs. I said, what is that? But as Sean was saying earlier, that our dad began to emote more towards the end of his life. I mean, Stanley, I think the visits from Stanley really allowed him to process his emotions. And sometimes I think it was beautiful and both very challenging because he would just sob. And, I may have seen him cry at different points in life, but I mean, like really sobbing. And that's the first time I saw like just how much pain, I think both physically and emotionally, he had been in for this whole entire time, and potentially, even maybe he was processing other, hurts that had happened in his life from before. So I think that was a real gift. I mean, he hadn't been able to go to church for a long time. I think with the both with his speech and then with the movement and then COVID. So he had been separated from getting, he could watch it on TV sometimes, but having a chaplain there in person sort of ministering to you personally is something completely different. So eternally grateful to you all.
Yeah, no, I that's beautiful. Was he was a spiritual man, a very spiritual man.
Yes.
Do you think that that helped him a little bit? It sounds like it did. The reason I ask that is because of that crisis of faith maybe initially, where you say, like, why is this happening to me? Why did I lose the ability to speak and to sing? Some of these very meaningful things to me, and then having to reconcile yourself to that.
I think he never lost faith in God, though, through it. He might have been confused about what was happening to him, but he also, I remember him saying, in the beginning when he first found out that he wasn't afraid to die. And even at the end, he wasn't afraid to die. I think what he began to see, though, I think he did sort of maybe think, given that, the diagnosis was so dire, 6 months, that I think when he realized that he was going to live, that he really did enjoy. So it was very uplifting.
He had a time frame initially, and then
and he's sort of like, oh, well, I'm this is not, I'm living.
I'm allowed to. Yes. I'm allowed to live a little more.
So I think it was maybe that's what was causing like the tears in the end, that he really realized that there was a lot to live for. Mm-hmm. So I think in the beginning he just kind of thought, well, it was over. So I do remember that kind of sadness.
That's interesting too. With Prognosis, this is called the Prognosis podcast. It's why Prognosis is particularly important to give, and to make sure that people are getting an accurate one. In his case, he did okay, but I would say, not being too far off, and the prognosis matters for some families too, because as you said, maybe that did cause him quite a bit of grief initially, thinking, I've got this amount of time. And then it turned out that he had markedly more time to complete the things that he wanted to, or to still experience things with family.
Right.
Yeah. Sean, how was it for you in perceiving the hospice portion of it? You said your dad began to emote more, and, we heard a little bit through Stanley. Did you have an ability to connect with your dad more?
So my interactions with hospice were mostly through Stanley. And yeah, I think Stanley provided a context that kind of gave a different, maybe it was entirely spiritual interaction, because mostly, Stanley would come to the living room, and we would kind of all be gathered in our different positions, not necessarily tightly next to each other, but in the same room and listening to each other. And our focus would usually be on Stanley's music, or on Stanley's. He would talk to my dad and kind of talk to him in a different way than others in the family talk to him. I think we'd gotten used to his resistance to talking, just because it seemed to cause him a lot of discomfort, not being able to, speak as he used to. Stanley, I guess, didn't have that hesitation, and so he would kind of just talk to him normally. I think, it gave a different feel to that interaction, and it kind of allowed us to connect differently to our dad in that moment also. And I think Sheena described it better than I could try to right now. But it was great to have those moments that just kind of changed the day-to-day interactions with our dad in a really profound way.
Yeah, I was. Each hospice experience is different, and some families get benefit from maybe CNA services. There's some meaningfulness in that, or somebody might really connect with the nurse or connect with the physician. And then you have the chaplaincy, which I have a very deep respect for, which brings that spiritual side. It sounded like that was particularly important for him in this situation.
It was.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting, as Sheena said. We had, I think Ashley was the third nurse, and she had such a sweet spirit that really, I think, connected with him as well. And it was perfect for him because he could be so stoic and kind of like tough, like this exterior. So not sort of like, she'd say, well, you're in pain. Oh, no, I'm not in pain. No. But she really did have this ability to connect with him. And then also I know I was the primary person that dealt with her, but just so patient with him. So I thought she was just ideal. So really kind of the combination. And sometimes Ashley and Stanley would overlap
together,
a couple of
right.
times just because, he was still there. And it was just so, it was really beautiful to see the interaction.
Hospice can be very social also.
Right, yeah.
It can provide not only the clinical and the spiritual, the medical portion of it, but it can be that social visit. It can be almost an integration into the family. Especially in a moment where, and as you just said, your dad may have felt honestly more comfortable or more relaxed about revealing things about himself because to you all he was dad and the provider and the doer. And then, it's hard to let go of that role. Talk to me about, so bringing us up to the end, tell me a little bit about, and it's not an easy discussion, but tell me how that went and the management of that and how you felt about that.
It was interesting because at the beginning part, I'd say, of the hospice, he was doing better. I mean, pretty well. I mean, he had a walker, but he was able. He was so determined every day to get up and get dressed and not be in bed. I mean, he would dress himself, and it was a challenge because it got to the point where he couldn't do that and he needed help. So we would all help doing that. And it just seemed like there were times when I was wishing that he would stay in bed, because it was so, well, I say I wish it, because when it did happen, it was incredibly, painful. But it was just, it felt like it was very difficult on him. So seeing that, decline as he started, he never really would acknowledge that he was in pain. But as, I know Ashley discussed it with you, the fact of helping to manage the pain and seeing him embrace, because he would accept it. So, but he didn't accept it until it was sort of offered and kind of like, so that, and I would say when it became that he just couldn't get out of bed, it was such, well, it was just it was just really very tough emotionally, because I knew if he could, he would have dragged himself out of it. That's just who he was. So just when he couldn't have when he absolutely had to have us care for him, and it was, I guess it was a gift to be able to give that to him, but it was also hard because it was just, that was not who he was. But it was, even at the end, it was very difficult because it was almost like he just wouldn't, he was so stubborn and he just wouldn't,
Let
he
go?
wouldn't let go.
Yeah.
He wouldn't let go. And Ashley actually suggested that we go in as a family and talk to him. And we did do that. And it was a very, I still remember, as a matter of fact, if I hear any of the music that we played during it, it just really takes me back to that day.
And to go in to give him permission to let go.
So each of us, we went in as a family, the three of us along with with Shaka, my stepson, and he did pass away later that day.
Yeah, and I do remember we had some stronger medications in place by that point to keep him comfortable. Sheena, what was your impression of the end also?
Yeah, I think it was pretty challenging. There was the period where he stopped being able to, get dressed, brush his teeth, all that stuff. I think my mom realized that it was taking him over an hour and a half to get ready in the morning, and so that's when we started trying to chime in to help, and he couldn't get out of bed by himself during the night to go to the bathroom or anything like that. So we were on a nightly rotation. So, every third night you would be on. And I remember feeling like that period just felt like kind of an endless tunnel, very challenging and not sort of knowing when it was going to end. But then you didn't know what was going to be on the other side, so you weren't necessarily wanting to get to the end of it, but it was still very hard. And then he started to decline even further, and so then he wasn't getting out of bed anymore, so we didn't have to get up as much during the night, but then that was sad because he couldn't get out of bed, and so there were other challenges. But I remember asking my mom, is Ashley coming today? When is Stanley coming? So it was nice to know, I can't imagine what it would have been sort of trying to do things on our own. Obviously we wouldn't have been able to because he needed the medication, and the care was very helpful because it was obvious at that point how much pain he was in, and sort of seeing we would be trying to move him in and out of a wheelchair, and you'd see the pain that he had in his arm, and in the past it wouldn't be visible on his face because he would hide it, but then it was so much that you could see it. So that it was definitely a challenging period. But in the last few days, I think someone from Home Hospice was there sort of every day leading up. And as my mom was saying, Ashley came, they thought he passed on a Tuesday, and they thought he might pass on Sunday or Monday. So Ashley had come on Monday, and then she came back on Tuesday, and she said, yeah, he's fighting it. He's fighting it. And so made the recommendation like my mom was saying, and that was a true gift for all of us, I think.
Yeah. Sean, did you have anything you wanted to say about your father's passing?
I was thinking that it was it was a blessing the whole time that we were able to, I guess, cohabitate throughout, I guess, since January. And over time, we gradually had to become more of a team or communicate more with each other as it took more coordination to care for my dad, getting closer to the end of his life. And that was... that kind of exploration, what that teamwork looked like, I appreciated that aspect of caring for him through the end. It kind of brought us closer, at least in my viewpoint. It brought us closer at the time where we kind of needed most to be close. Kind of culminating with that moment that my mom was describing, where it was just kind of us and Shaka and my dad, and kind of supporting each other and him with the different I guess music that we were sharing or stories that we were sharing. So yeah, I guess that's what I would add to that.
You know, it's interesting because we sometimes say this, or I sometimes, in speaking to others that, you know, I work with, I say that it's actually a privilege to see someone pass. I know that sounds almost like a morbid thought, but it's a privilege to be able to be there and to see it through. And I do hear that your family came together. There were some aspects that were divinely inspired in this, where your family was able to come together, be together, and actually be with him as a team and supporting each other and seeing this through. I wanted to ask you a kind of maybe a strange question. Have you felt his presence since that time? Sometimes that happens.
Definitely.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I do. And it's more than, he was cremated, and we're planning to spread his ashes in Maui, which was his favorite place. But
It's a good place.
They're still at the
I'm
house.
glad he chose that and not something where you didn't.
Right. And there's a very large picture of him on the mantle. So it's more than that. It's kind of, as you said, it's like the legacy. Like, you know, I definitely have felt him, you know, his, even just in the things that I know that he liked having done, you know, I wasn't one to have made my bed, but but I've done it, you know, since we've been married. As I said, we were married for quite a while. So it's kind of funny in those moments. It's like every time I'm like making my bed, I'm thinking, well, I probably wouldn't be making my bed now, but for
That's
him,
the legacy.
right. Well, he was very neat. He was very neat
Yes.
and tidy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like that has really just, I realized how much that's like part of me now,
Yeah.
like liking that, those things. But it's in more than that. I mean, I think, as I mentioned, you know, just his love for family, and he would have been just thrilled that, you know, that Sheena and Sean were in, you know, living in Atlanta. That was something that was very, important to him. So yeah, no, I definitely feel, you know, even that, you know, sometimes like he's even like, you know, smiling, you know, or happy, or, you know, still watching over the family. So, yeah, it's a comforting thought, not in, I don't think it, you know, I've seen it in a positive way, but I've definitely felt his presence.
Yeah. Sheena, what about you? Because it's not easy to lose a parent, right? And you're, you know, you've got a big milestone coming up to graduate, right? There are things where you think, well, you know, how do you feel about things right now?
Yeah, I mean, from definitely the service, I felt like his presence at the service, and Stanley sang Purple Rain at the service, which he had done for my dad at the house, and he actually created his own track to it and everything. So he put a lot of effort into it, and it was just amazing at the service, and actually, you know, felt really joyful, and like he would have had a good time with us. We were had our hands in the air, you know. So the service was lovely, and then if I sort of felt like so he passed in the middle of my spring quarter, so I had like a week where I was sort of doing lots of work for preparation for the service and then not doing much schoolwork. And so then going back in, it was a lot to get done. And so it kind of feels like I've been going because then my job started. But it finished this past Friday, and so over the weekend I had told Stanley and Ashley at the service that I would send them some like a video clip so they could hear his voice, because by the time you all got involved, he could pretty much only say one word. And so they really didn't get to hear him talk. But as my mom was saying earlier, even though he didn't care much for the talkers, he was definitely a talker himself. He was just a talker and a doer. So anyway, so this weekend I was looking at some old family videos, because he used to love to roll the camcorder and would narrate sort of what was going on. And so it was really nice to just watch some videos and hear his voice. And
did you have any of him singing? You were saying he was a good singer.
I think I have found one of, I haven't watched it yet, but as I was scrolling through, because they're like these 2-hour clips, and back in the old days it was on cassettes, right? And so he would tape like video, he would tape my older brother Shaka his football games, and then there might be some commercials on there, and so I haven't gone through all the footage. Yes, exactly. But I know there's one. I was scanning through right as I was closing up my computer, and I saw him with me and Sean on either side. We used to do these family like holiday talent show type things, and so I think I have one, but I have to listen to it.
That'd be nice to listen to.
Yes.
What would you all say, kind of in conclusion, talking about the hospice experience and the experience of someone getting diagnosed and going through difficulty and what they have to cope with, and how hospice comes in, and a little bit of the preparation for that, and then watching things unfold. What would you say as a family about terminal illness and also hospice, the hospice experience? It's a big question, but just kind of bringing it all together. Sean, do you want to start? I know that's a big question, but...
Sure. I can try. I think kind of in line with what we were just discussing, it's difficult one of the difficulties with terminal illness is that the most recent memories you have of someone are not they don't feel fully representative of who that person was. But at the same time, it gives you different shades of the person that you might not have seen or understood in the past. So it gets you not the same person who they were your full life, but a different side of that person. And I think hospice, for me, my experience with hospice is that it kind of drew that side of him out more. Just, speaking mainly of my experiences with Stanley, which was my main experience with the hospice. So I think that's why I would have an overwhelmingly positive, experience, but with hospice, just because it brought out that fuller richness in the experience of my dad, at least towards the end of his life. Yeah.
Sheena, what about you? Like in kind of pulling it all together for yourself, if you were able to.
Sure. I think, terminal illness is difficult, especially because you don't, the initial prognosis he got was 6 to 12 months. And then at the end of the 6 to 12 months, he seemed to be doing okay, but there was never going to be a cure, right? And so to me, it felt like sort of a cloud hanging over. And I tried not to think about it a lot, which I don't know that was the best way to handle it. And so I think, the timing with the pandemic, obviously the pandemic is terrible for many reasons, but with this, the timing felt like divine intervention, because I was able, this is the longest I've been in Georgia in 20 years. And so to have that extended period of time. Like at times it was challenging because I couldn't do this sort of not thinking about it and blocking it out, because every day you did get the reminders, particularly as he started to decline, that there was, that he was sick. But I would say, I think with hospice, it helps you to understand and give people who have been through it, or give you an opportunity to speak with people who have shepherded and guided families through it. And so I think engaging with it is much better than sort of blocking it off like I did for the first 2.5 years. And, I'm so grateful that I had so much time towards the end. And I think most people, with the way that life goes, everything is so go, go, go. You don't necessarily have that time. And hospice is sort of a reminder, like, actually, this time is special and you're not going to get it back. So, like I said earlier, I'm eternally grateful for you all. And I would highly recommend that people learn what hospice is sort of early in the process, so that they can really get help and guidance and sort of moving through the process of dealing with a loved one's terminal illness. Because for most people, they've probably not thought about that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that time and again. Cathy, what would you say?
I guess the thing that I would, from my perspective, at the beginning, when he was first diagnosed, I remember, of course, Sheena was there initially, but then went back to school when Sean was in Connecticut. So there was a long period that I was like just trying to figure out and be this caregiver, by myself. And I remember often initially feeling like I don't have any idea, like when, like you said, it's like they say 6 months, possibly, 12. Well, am I going to come in? It would be very scary to think, is this something that's going to be sudden? Mm-hmm. So, but I realized I couldn't live like that after a while, and sort of, to Sheena's point, I kind of put it out of my mind that it was even, because he lived for 4 years almost. So I just became accepting, and I thought, I'm just going to have to take this each day, and I can't be projecting out into the future. So what was really helpful with hospice is when it felt like it was really just, it almost took me back to the beginning, when I was feeling like, oh my goodness, he has a terminal illness and he, could die. I had put that really away for quite a while. So it was just to have someone there that could help guide. As Sheena said, I would just recommend that people learn more about it. It's really a help. It's not a scary process. So what I thought was going to be, that's why I avoided it for so long myself, even though, Dr. Szabo had mentioned it earlier. I was reluctant because it seemed like I didn't know it was going to be something that was compassionate and caring, and something that could help really help us get through the end of Larry's life. And I don't think that we could have, honestly, we could have managed it without that help. With hospice, and just, it's not, denying things or blocking things, they serve their purpose too. What I liked what you said just now about that is there needs to be a mindfulness of the moment. We're all struggling with that, projecting in the future, projecting backwards in the past, or thinking about the past, projecting in the future rather than being in the moment, right? And that actually is one of the maybe bigger coping mechanisms for dealing with this. As you said, just put it aside when you're not seeing it happen at that moment. And the second thing is that absolutely, understanding, and that's what this whole podcast is about, understanding the nuances of dying, the nuances of decline, the nuances of how people progress in terminal illness is critical.
And most people are not willing. You all have been very open, but it's very tough to get people to want to even engage in that, because then they think, oh, you know what, it's too painful, or I'm thinking about my own mortality. But it's a critical thing to do, is to think about that. Like you said, know about hospice, know what it offers, and think about that. Think about how would you want your own passing to occur, and start to engage in those questions. And then by virtue of that, how do you want your own life to be, right? And you all had an incredible moment of proximity around this, which was transformative too. I did want to ask you one additional question. You mentioned mindfulness before the program. Mm-hmm. How do you remain mindful? It sounds like you were being mindful during all of this, maybe unwittingly.
Yes.
But
I think for me, it was about, as you said, focusing on being present, mm-hmm. and not getting ahead of myself. And, I can be that planner, kind of like all the what ifs, and all of a sudden you find yourself not really living, in the moment. Mm-hmm. And I think you do have to take, and also the past, like, mm-hmm. it's like you get to, focus on, something that happened. I can't change that. I can't change the past. Mm-hmm. So the only thing we can do is be present and try to make the best choices that we can, mm-hmm. In that moment. And that's just been, it was really, truly, I think that was divine intervention as well, because I know I would not have gotten through this illness without, and I don't mean gotten through it in a, kind mm-hmm. of like, mm-hmm. that's all I was sort of doing. But I think it was important to be able to be present and really kind of realize that, because sometimes when we're kind of rushing to the end, that you're just missing. So you're missing what is happening in that moment. And there was a lot of, there was some beautiful, oddly beautiful and touching things that happen. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's part of what life is.
Yeah, right.
I think that's what people think, the stagnancy or the status quo. But no, it's not. It's the change. Mm-hmm. And it's the anticipation of that, and then saying within that change, how do I stay mindful? Because I know change is coming. Like you said, and not waiting for the shoe to drop, which is very hard. I mean, it's easily said, not easily done, but still, trying to pull yourself away from that and say, I'm here now, and I'm just going to try, even with the cloud, I'm going to try my best to focus on now. I really, really appreciate you all coming. I very much do. Sheena, thank you so much. I'm super excited for your next steps in your career. And then I loved listening to you speak. Sean, thank you also. So thanks so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. And thank you for listening.